Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince and Other Writings. He was getting into more of the politics of Italy, Naples, the Venetians, and all that. So we're going to continue on that point, and he begins with mentioning Sforza. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sforza always had the Brascheschi against him, so that they kept an eye on one another. Francesco directed his ambition toward Lombardy, Braccio against the church and the kingdom of Naples. But let us come to what occurred a short time ago. The Florentines made Paolo Vitelli their captain, a very prudent man who had risen from private life to achieve the greatest reputation. If he had taken Pisa, there would be no one who would deny that the Florentines would have had to stick with him, because he had been engaged as a soldier by their enemies. They would have had no remedy for that, and if they had retained him, they would have had to obey him. As for the Venetians, if one considers the progress they made, it will be seen that they operated safely and gloriously as long as they made war with their own forces. That was before they directed their military operations to the land, and they fought most ably, virtuosamente, using their nobles and their armed commoners. Okay, so using their nobles, their armed commoners. So, kind of reminds me of the Second Amendment. Common folk having the right to bear arms, not just the upper class who can afford security. But when they began to fight on land, they left their prowess, virtue behind, and followed the usual customs of Italy. At the beginning of their expansion onto the land, they did not have much to fear from their captains, because they did not have much territory there, and enjoyed a substantial reputation. But as they expanded, which they did under Carmagnola, so we have another person here, they got a taste of this air for seeing that he was most capable. After they had defeated the Duke of Milan under his leadership, and knowing, on the other hand, how he had grown cold in battle, they judged that they could no longer win with him, because he did not want to do so, nor could they dismiss him for fear of losing again what they had acquired. That's really a pickle. Wondering if you can dismiss someone, but then if you do, there's going to be some severe consequences. So that they were obliged, in order to make sure of him, to have him killed. Dang, man, that's rough. Oh, that's rough. It's like, hey, we can't really use you anymore. You have grown cold in battle. We can't really have you around. And if we dismiss you, we might lose again. So, lose what we acquired. So we're just gonna have you assassinated. Jeez. They then had as captains Bartolomeo da Bergamo, Roberto da San Severino, the Count of Pitigliano, and the like, from whom they had to fear their loss, not their gain, as happened subsequently at Vaila, where, in one day, they lost 1 in 800 years with the enormous effort they had acquired. Now that's a substantial loss. Wow. From these armies come only slow, tardy, and weak conquests, but sudden and miraculous losses. Ooh, that's a line right there. Slow, tardy, weak conquests that end suddenly and are just like a miraculous loss. And because with these examples I have arrived in Italy, which has now, for many years, been ruled by mercenary armies. Okay, notice this. So what's right? Mercenaries. This is a very important subject. Italy maintaining its strength through mercenaries. Is that coming back to America? That's a good question. Because some have argued allowing a lot of military-aged men into America to fill the ranks of the military, and in exchange offering them citizenship, is a form of getting mercenaries. I want to discuss them more in depth, so that when we have seen their origin and development, they can be more easily corrected. You must then understand that in recent times, when the empire began to be driven out of Italy, and the Pope acquired more prestige there in temporal affairs, Italy was divided into many states. Okay, so Italy was divided into many states because many of the great cities took up arms against their nobles, who had first been favored by the emperor, and held them in subjection, while the church now favored the citizens in order to acquire prestige in temporal affairs. Now notice this, the church, okay, we have factions, confederacies almost, divided into many states. Notice this, the founding fathers really studied the past, right? So, the United States. Why is it called the United States? Really think about that. All the states united in one union, because they can see, those well-read men, that when you have a nation that's really divided in these noble classes warring against each other, it creates quite a lot of chaos. And a nation divided falls divided. When you're one solid front, it's more potent. Your punches take more of an impact. That's why if we look at it as Muslims, we're one ummah. We're not supposed to be a bunch of divided sects warring against each other, right? We have to try to avoid factions, avoid splitting. He also mentions here the church. So you have the emperor, and then you have the church. So it's very important to understand Christian history and what occurred when they had their moments of power, and how they lost it in the United States. And in many other cities, citizens became princes. Thus, since Italy had come to almost entirely into the hands of the church, and a few republics, so a few republics, and then the church. So these territories, the church got some, there are some that are republics. And since those priests and those other citizens were not accustomed to bearing arms, they began to hire foreign soldiers. So notice this, very important point here. People who don't want their citizens to be tough and armed and educated are going to have to resort to outsourcing their security. And that comes with risks as well, right? If your people are trained and armed and are educated, and you have a healthy culture around gun rights and knowledge, and fortifying the use, that's a good thing. That can help a lot of people. If you don't have that, and everyone's afraid and terrified and brittle and mentally ill, now you're going to have to hire foreign soldiers as your security. And that, as Machiavelli has pointed out in previous readings, comes with many risks. The first to bring prestige to this kind of soldiering was Alberigo da Conio from the Romagna. From the training of this man came, among others, Braccio and Sforza, who were in their time the arbiters of Italy. After these came all the others who up to our own times have led these armies. And the results of their prowess, virtue, has been that Italy has been overrun by Charles. So Italy being overrun by Charles, okay, Sforza, Braccio, Alberigo, da Conio from the Romagna, preyed on by Louis, raped by Ferdinand. Okay, so Louis was of France, Charles was of the Holy Roman Empire, if I recall. Ferdinand was of Spain. Ferdinand of Aragon? Yeah, I believe. Yeah. And insulted by the Swiss. The method they have used has been first to take away the prestige of the infantry in order to increase their own. They have done this because they had no states of their own, and lived by exercising their profession, so that a few foot soldiers would have not increased their reputation, and a great many could not be provided for, and therefore they restricted themselves to cavalry. Okay, restricted themselves to cavalry, since with a manageable number they could provide for themselves and gain honor. It's a lot of horses. And things have been reduced to such a state that in an army of 20,000 soldiers, one cannot find 2,000 infantry. Ooh. Oh wow, okay. So it appears here that if you got a lot of cavalry, but you don't have a lot of infantry. Wow. This was a time when people had to go face to face. Like, absolutely brutal. Beyond this, they had made every effort to spare themselves and the soldiers any hardship and fear by not killing one another in skirmishes, but taking one another prisoner without asking ransom. Ooh, okay, so not doing skirmishes, but rather taking prisoner. Different kinds of punishments. The skirmishes, you get maimed and you're eliminated right then and there. A ransom is like a psychological, dealing with like the smell of your own feces and urine, you know, because you gotta have your bucket in the cell with you. Your hands are bound sometimes. Sometimes you just have to urinate on yourself. Humiliation, right? They would not attack towns at night, nor would those in the towns attack the tents of the besiegers. They made neither stockades, okay, so stockades, nor ditches around the camp. They did not campaign in winter, and all these things were permitted by their military discipline, and were invented by them, as had been said, to escape hardship and dangers, with the result that they have led Italy into slavery and degradation. So it appears here, from what I'm reading, is a big thunderstorm outside. I'm going to plug in my phone real quick in case the power goes out, and then I will have plenty of battery. Okay. It appears here that by avoiding danger and hardship, it appears that he's saying this made the military weaker, right? So those who didn't want to campaign in winter maybe it sounds smart to do that because it's a bitter cold, food rationing, the problems that come with sickness, but maybe soldiers are supposed to be toughened up in that way. And maybe if your enemy finds out you don't campaign in winter and their soldiers are used to winter, this could hurt you. Reminds me of in Game of Thrones where Cersei Lannister, she was mentioned, you know, God save you if you go into the north. She was talking to Joffrey, her son, about the Northerners know winter, like they know cold and they know their own territory, and the summer soldiers going into the winter is just not going to work. That the North is just too wild and too vast, and the Northerners know how to deal with cold in their own terrain. And then it makes you think about how the wildlings, it was cold where they are too, and they know their terrain as well, and how the Night's Watch had a difficult time, and how the cold is something that tests the Night's Watch with their long winters where they have to eat the horses, and some resort to cannibalism. And those who survive the long nights, those long winters, they have a different type of strength to them. And in that series, the summer soldiers were insulted, you know. Then again, though, handling the heat and stuff like that is pretty intense. Wow, I don't know if you can hear the rain, but it's absolutely beautiful. It's like pouring like a shower out there, like a deep, beautiful rain. It's absolutely wonderful. The best weather to read in is rain. It's my absolute favorite. Now, there are some points here that I want to read. It's about all these little footnotes, okay, that I find to be educational, because to really understand Machiavelli, we have to know the history of Italy. We really gotta know who the players are, the lessons he's taught, you know, the rivalry of the church, the republics, divided into many states, and mercenaries, all that, in order to recognize how difficult life was and how the history of Italy is like wild, man. I'm part Italian, and it's like they had like going from the Roman Empire to this time period to now. What do they have? It's just a tourist destination and fashion, you know, Italian leathers and perfumes and pizza. Is, you know, it's really not. They don't got it like they used to. Now they got the American Italians, the Soprano and Goodfellas and stuff like that. Okay, the first footnote here is Machiavelli refers to mercenaries here as soldati, soldiers, using a word that contains a double meaning, which runs through this chapter and expresses perfectly Machiavelli's criticism of this sort of army. Yeah, okay, so, alright, we were on the right track. That he was, in a slight way, you know, mentioning just the problems of that type of army. A soldato was, of course, what in modern English or Italian we call a soldier, but the word derives from the verb soldare, which means to pay someone a salary. A soldo, a meaning that was very much alive in Machiavelli's time. It is the basis of his criticism of mercenaries. They serve only for money, whereas a citizen army would fight for the love of country. So here, Machiavelli is pointing out that a mercenary army is not the same as those who have love for country. A good example, again, as I mentioned, it can show you. Okay, so the Golden Company, Cersei Lannister wants to hire, and Tyrion, and it previously tells her, right, Father taught you to have too much respect for gold, right? The Golden Company, Daenerys got the second sons, how she acquired them, right, with Dario Naharis, how he flipped sides because he wanted to fight for beauty, you know. And then one of the commanders is like, if we've been paid, and if we don't do our job, we're mercenaries, we're sellswords, right? No one will want to hire us because we don't keep our word. And so it just goes to point out how let me go further. So when Cersei's on the Iron Throne, and she's talking about how Daenerys has Dothraki, Screamers, and the Unsullied. These are foreigners, so she's supposed to be the Targaryen lineage, but she has no domestic people on her side. She's coming with foreigners to invade the nobles' lands, and this rallies Samuel Tully's father, right, to switch sides and leave the Queen of Thorns and to join Cersei's side, because he doesn't like foreigners. He don't like wildlings. He loves his area, right? He loves his homeland, and he even said that to Cersei, that she was raised here, she's part of here, whereas Daenerys was raised somewhere else. So she has different ties. Her blood may have been from there, but because her dad was the Mad King. But she wasn't raised in the country, whereas Cersei knows the customs, knows the people, and people won't feel more attached to someone who's from their culture than not from their culture. So Machiavelli pointing out such a thing of how the difficulties of mercenaries is represented in fiction and in real life, because that's what's happening today, with talking of who can go into the military and whatnot. Number 2, According to the French historian Philippe de Comines, Pope Alexander remarked about the ease with which Charles the VIII? I don't know. Charles VIII 13th? I don't know. I don't know my Roman numerals very well. VIII conquered Italy, saying that he needed just chalk and wooden spurs. Chalk to mark the houses where his soldiers would be billeted, and spurs to prick on the mules carrying supplies. Savonarola was the one who claimed that the French invasion was due to the sins of the Italians. Ooh. Now notice here, Pope Alexander just pointing out how easily it was for Italy to be conquered. In that the punishment of the land was for the sins. I think that's quite interesting when you look at America. Like, because for us Muslims in the Quran, we are told, look throughout the land and see what was of those who came before. A sign for people who reasoned. The people of Ad, Thamud, the people of Lot. There's so many signs. Fir'aun, right? Him. There's so much you can look at. Now, atheists don't believe that, but I think it's very important for people to remember that if you allow so much sin in your land, you'll reap what you sowed. Okay? That's the difference between atheists and secular liberals. I mean, that's the difference between atheists who are secular liberals and religious folk. In 241 BCE, after the end of the First Punic War, 264 through 241 BCE, Carthaginian mercenaries turned on their employers in what was called the Servile War. Ooh, brutal. So, see how Machiavelli was pointing out the dangers of mercenaries? Now we see what he was talking about. Number 4, the Thebans asked Philip, Alexander's father, Alexander the Great, for help against the Phoenicians. And less than a decade later, in 338 BCE, Philip turned on the Thebans and defeated them in the Battle of Chaeronea. Okay, so, wow, Alexander's dead. Philip turned on the Thebans, so that's brutal. They asked Philip for help, and then he turned on them, and then defeated them. Later on. History is wild, man. Now, that example is similar to how, again, that's why there's some brilliance in the Game of Thrones. You just cut out all the sex scenes, and you just keep it with the good character development and dialogue. It's actually really cool. But when Marjorie is married to Joffrey, and then married to Tommen, right? So they're an alliance with the House Lannister, and then all of a sudden, Cersei, she's unhappy with, Marjorie, turns against Olenna, and Olenna's soldiers now have to fight the Lannisters. Talk about confusing. And then think about how Jon's soldiers, the Stark soldiers, were teamed up with the Unsullied. And then Jon kills Daenerys. And now those two almost would have fought each other. It's so strange where people were allies and then they flip and then now you have to fight them. It's so strange. Such a strange thing. 5. Filippo Visconti was the last of his line to rule Milan. Ooh, okay, let's see that. When he died in 1447, Milan became a republic, but it immediately engaged Francesco Sforza's services as a condottiere, and by 1450 he had made himself the master of the city. Whew. Well, that republic didn't last long. Oh man. And now Milan, the city, is famous for fashion and gay men and very tight leather pants and anorexic androgynous models. The Sforza named here is Quacomuzzo Attendolo Sforza, 1369 to 1424. Giovanni II of Naples had no heir and wanted the French royal family to inherit the kingdom. However, upon her death in 1435, Alfonso of Aragon expelled the French and established the Aragonese house in Naples. Wow. Wow. One of the French to inherit? 7. Sir John Hawkwood, 1320-1394, an English mercenary known as Giovanni Acuto in Italy, served Florence from 1370 to his death. He headed a group of English mercenaries known as the White Company. So English mercenaries called the White Company. That's cool. So in the 13th century, you know, they got these, they got some mercenaries just up and about everywhere. He had a whole different name in Italy. Dang. The Braceschi were followers of Niccolo Fortebraccio, also known as the Braccio de Monton, who was a contemporary of the elder Sforza. In his Florentine history, 5.2, Machiavelli sees the two as the leading mercenaries of the early 15th century. They stood for two opposed schools of military discipline. Okay, so schools of military discipline? Okay. So the Braceschi, and then we have Niccolo Fortebraccio, again the elder Sforza. Paolo Vitelli commanded the Florentine troops against Pisa, but when he did not succeed in capturing the city, he was accused of treason and was tried and executed in 1499. Ooh, talk about failing and then really beating the consequences. Wow. So he failed at capturing it, and they're like, you know what? You failed so bad, we're going to accuse you of treason. Let's snippity snap that head. Francesco Busone, Count of Carmagnola, 1380-1432, was the victor at the Battle of Maclodio, 1427, which gave the Venetians Bergamo and Brescia. But because of his dilatory manner in waging war against Milan, the Venetians suspected him of treachery and had him executed in the spring of 1432. Dang. Wow. That's wild. We had those two where, like, he's executed. So look at this. So 9 and 10, you have examples of, so Paolo Vitelli and Francesco Busone, like, they were sitting there being soldiers, and then your own side wants you executed. What a risky business. Risky business. Wow. Subhanallah. 11. Bartolomeo da Bergamo, better known as Bartolomeo Coleoni, 1400-1475, was a disciple of Sforza and eventually became the leader of the forces of Venice. Okay, so Bartolomeo da Bergamo, also known as Bartolomeo Coleoni, he was also a disciple of Sforza and became a leader of the forces of Venice. Wow. He is commemorated by the famous equestrian statue of him by Andrea Verrocchio that stands in front of the church of San Giovanni e Paolo in Venice. Robert da San Severino served Venice in the war against Ferrara, 1482-1484. Niccolo Orsini, 1442-1510, the Count of Pitigliano, was one of the leaders of the Venetian army in the Battle of Vaila, also known as Agnadello, which was fought on May 14, 1509, against the forces of Julius, and resulted in the Venetians' loss of all of their holdings on land. Dang. Look at this rocky history. Absolutely rocky. 12. The developments of which Machiavelli speaks here in the 13th century, especially in northern and central Italy, the empire to which he refers is the Holy Roman Empire, Charles, from whose ruler many Italian noblemen, theoretically at least, held their lands as fiefs. Oh, fiefdoms? So feudalism. Alberigo da Barbiano, Count of Conio, 1409, founded the first mercenary army in Italy. Ooh, look at that. How cool is that? We just learned something. The Company of St. George, and made the mounted soldier the key fighting figure in the army. He taught both Braccio Montone and Guacomuzzo attendolo sforza. Dang. So notice like this, like the feudalistic system. Counts, dukes, all of that. It's quite different than the republics. It's very interesting to see how all these aristocratic classes, the nobles, they have like just all these armies and like a leader. Remember how he was just letting us know in previous sections where like a leader's really got to make sure that like your relationship with the nobles of your nation is so important, as well as the regular common folk. With the nobles, because they had access to money and an army, could literally depose you. Wow, very cool. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. The next chapter is chapter 13 on auxiliary, mixed, and citizen soldiers. So we'll pause it there. I mean, this section was really cool because it just went on to let us know how there's, using your nobles and then armed commoners. We learned the toughness of army, swift defeats, and how many kinds of troops there are, and how he spoke about mercenaries. And just a reminder, he said here, I want to demonstrate more fully the sorry nature of these arms. Mercenary captains are either excellent men or not. If they are, you cannot trust yourself to them, for they will always aspire to their own greatness, either by oppressing you, who are their employer, or by oppressing others beyond your intentions. But if the captain is not capable, virtuoso, ordinarily he will ruin you. Now remember how he said ruin you, and then we read those footnotes of how about how some people were executed, like Paolo Vitelli. So he didn't. He commanded the Florentine troops against Pisa. He didn't win the city, and then he's executed. It's like crazy, man. So it's wild. Something to think about, especially in our times when we have people wanting to bring mercenaries back. Proxy wars, mercenaries. Some people would argue that, America has used mercenary type of measures in the Middle East to destabilize it. Funding different groups to cause trouble consistently, and then using those groups to keep the war machine ticking and keep draining and funneling all those tax dollars, right? People who make so much money from war and who siphon off money for themselves to pocket for, with wars, have a vested interest in keeping that alive. Dwight Eisenhower, wasn't he the one who gave that military-industrial complex speech? Right? So, something to think about. Let me know what you think. I truly enjoyed this reading. Machiavelli, he's a smart man, and people use his name very spookily, but I don't really see what's so spooky about him. It just seems like basic stuff that Sun Tzu would say, right, in The Art of War. Let me know what you think. If you'd like to join my blog and support the channel, it's www.subscribestar.com. Milahan Archive. Hope to see you there.